Good afternoon. Today our conversation is with Teresa Baxter, better known as Terry. Terry's family immigrated. Her grandfather and his sons immigrated from Italy, and they settled in New Jersey, and they became entrepreneurs in New Jersey. And Terry then, of course, grew up in New Jersey. She comes from a very close-knit family. When she graduated from high school, she went on to New York to go to college. And after college, she worked for a couple of years, and then a good friend who was living in D.C. and working in D.C. called her and said she really wanted Terry to come down there and be her roommate. So she did. And she got a job there, and she also met her future husband there, Major Lee Baxter. They were married in 1979, and that's when her military life started. So we're going to hear now from Terry herself. Well, Terry, we know that you started life in New Jersey. Talk to us a little bit about that and your family immigration.
I was born in 1947 in Paterson, New Jersey. From my family, basically, and my parents were immigrants. My father came when he was 27, and my mother came when she was 15. And they were not formally educated, but they were smart. And they made the most of, when they got to this country, of what they had. And they worked very hard. And my father was fortunate because when he came to this country in 1937, his father had started a business in 1927. It was an Italian bread baking company. So he had all his sons working with him. It was R. Gianella and sons, 3 sons, all working in the business with him. Unfortunately, World War II broke out, and 2 of my uncles, one joined the Marines, and he ended up in Iwo Jima and was killed in action. And my other uncle was on Omaha Beach on the Normandy front. Fortunately, he came back. So in the meantime, my grandfather, who was a diabetic, died of complications from diabetes. So what ended up in the business as the father and 3 sons ended up being just 2 sons, the 2 sons that were left. And they continued on with the business.
Well, I understand that the business was extremely successful.
Yes, it became extremely successful. They worked hard at it, and they worked at it many years, and they serviced southern New York and northern New Jersey, and they delivered Italian bread to restaurants and schools. And they did very, very well. I found out later, which was surprising to me, that they FedExpressed their bread to Frank Sinatra. They FedExpressed it to the West Coast, and he was a regular customer. And we didn't have any idea, and we asked my mother, who obviously knew a lot about the business and whatever, and she said, oh yes, we've been FedExpressing it to him for several years now. So that was really kind of an interesting thing we learned about the business.
Kind of makes my mouth water, if you want to know the truth. Well, and I understand too that there were several girls, and not just the 3 sons, but were there not, do you have aunts too from that? Were there not some girls in that family? Or?
Yes, there were. There were 5. There were originally 4 sons and 5 girls. But in the Italian culture, it's the men that count. It's kind of a macho culture. So the women, you know, they kind of got married, or, you know, my aunts worked, though. Even back then, they did work. They worked in garment factories back then. Patterson was known for its garment factories and its silk factories. And they worked in either one of those. And
got married.
And got married. And that was it. That's what they did.
Well, then you went to New York for college. Where was that?
I went to Adelphi University in Garden City, New York, and got my undergraduate degree in speech pathology. And after that, when I graduated, moved to the Washington, D.C. area, where I was employed for 11 years by Fairfax County Public Schools as a speech pathologist. And part of that time, I had to go back for a master's, and I applied for a sabbatical, which I received, and I got a master's degree in speech pathology from Catholic University in Washington, D.C.
And you did that about 11 years, I guess, and worked in that field. Is that correct?
Yes, in that location. And then after I met my husband and we moved, I worked at the Rocky Mountain Rehab Center in Colorado Springs. And then I also, when we returned to the Washington, D.C. area, worked at Easter Seals in Arlington.
So, and you married Major Lee Baxter in 1979.
Yes.
So that started a move to many different places. Where all have you lived?
Well, the majority of our places that we've lived were, we returned to a lot of the same places. So we lived in three tours in Germany I had with Lee. Lee had 5 tours in Germany because he had 2 before we married. We lived in Colorado Springs. We lived in Washington, D.C. area. We had 3 tours there. And we had 3 tours I did with him at Fort Sill here in Lawton, Oklahoma, and that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, okay. All right. So where, do you have a favorite place that you lived?
It was always Germany. I always enjoyed going back to Europe.
And why was that?
It was just so interesting, and you could go to different countries, and there was always something going on that was different, and it was just so educational. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I understand, of course, and you mentioned that living in Germany, you were able to, it was easy to travel around to the different countries.
Yes.
And I know you've had some interesting experiences. You went to a concentration camp on one of those trips.
I went to 2.
Oh.
Went to Dachau, and I went to Buchenwald. And you know, you always hesitate going to places like that because you're afraid of what you're going to see, and rightfully so. What I remember about Dachau is the smell, the ovens. You could still, after 40 years, in that time frame, smell the burning of the bodies in the brick. They also had nuns, which I thought was interesting, that were constantly praying for world peace on that location. And that was their job. They did nothing else but pray.
I think you've probably, in all of your travels, and the fact that, you know, during this time that you were in the military, Lee, you helped Lee become a general. So guessing you got to meet several people, and you have met some VIPs. Share that with us.
Well, Lee's pretty much gotten where he's gotten because of Lee. He's a very strong personality, very opinionated. But anyway, we did get to meet quite a few dignitaries.
Can you recall some?
Oh yeah, Dick Cheney, Newt Gingrich. At that time, Governor Keating, Mary Fallon, John Warner, who was at that time Elizabeth Taylor's ex-husband.
You were telling me about Sarah Palin.
Yes. I was very impressed with Sarah Palin. Now, I know Sarah Palin hasn't, unfortunately, achieved what maybe she had hoped to achieve, but she was probably one of the most dynamic individuals I've ever met. I had a VIP meeting with her in a room about this size, and she came in, and there were maybe 15 to 20 people there, and she was just, I don't know what it was about her. She was just very dynamic and an excellent speaker. And what she said really made a lot of sense, too.
And you have stepchildren?
Yes.
Who are they and where are they?
Okay, Kelly. She lives in Iowa, and she's a guidance counselor, I just remembered. And Jason, my stepson, who lives in Michigan, they deal with retired people in retired homes.
What are your hobbies, Terry?
My hobbies are gardening and cooking, Italian cooking, and interior design and antiques.
Your home is beautifully decorated,
Well,
so
thank
you've
you.
done a wonderful job with your own home.
Lee surprised me. He flew me to Atlantic City, and we had a 2-hour evening with Sophia Loren, where they interviewed her for 2 hours. And it was at one of these very large Las Vegas type hotels, but it was in Atlantic City. And I enjoyed that personally because I'm a fan of hers, and I have seen most of her movies.
A pageant?
He surprised me one other time, and I always wanted to go to the Miss America pageant. And so we went to the Miss America pageant.
Terry, what brought you and Lee to Epworth?
Well, I think it was our good friends, the Gibsons, that brought us here. Because, you know, we knew they lived here. We had come to visit them, I think 1 or 2 times, and they wanted us to come and be part of the community. And so at first I was personally against it. Lee was always for it. And I kept telling him, no, I'm not ready. I'm not doing that. And then after a year or so, I started thinking about it and realized, that's probably a good idea. And so we did it.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, you are welcome neighbors, for sure.
Well, thank you.
It's been a very full life for you, Terry. You have lived a lot of places. You certainly have met hundreds of people. I know you have many fond memories in your bucket. So the conversation has been so delightful. I've enjoyed it so much. And I thank you so much for sharing your story.